Welcome to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat, and I am very excited to let you know that this is the 400th episode of the Mom and Mind podcast. I've been going for 8 years, coming up on 9 years in June already. I can't even believe that, but I just wanted to take a little bit of time to reflect on these last 8 years and take a little bit of time to really honor all of the guests who have come on to share their personal stories, all of the experts that have come on to share their knowledge and their wisdom and their pathways to healing for all of the people who are dealing with perinatal mental health conditions. We've had so many amazing episodes on this podcast. And if you had asked me if I thought I was going to get to 400 episodes or more when I first started this in 2016, I would have had no clue that I was going to go this long or even last this long, let alone the fact that I barely knew what I was doing at the time. And I really want to give a very deep and heartfelt thank you to all of you who've been longtime listeners, and especially the ones who've been listening since day one. It's amazing how many people have tuned in, how many people have shared this podcast, whether it be the whole thing or specific episodes, and have been able to use this both as a place of reflection about their own experience, a place of learning more about their own experience and other people's journey, and a way to help other people get through theirs. That was my hope. That was my goal when I set out to make this, is in the trainings that I've been in and the conferences I went to. It was fantastic that all of us were getting together and learning and collaborating. That's great. And also, what about the people out there who need to hear these stories, need to know that there are experts specializing in this, need to know that there's help available and hope available? Getting this podcast out to people really came from that there felt like there was a need. And there was, and there is a need to have these real life journeys be told and be heard and be witnessed for all of the reasons that I've already mentioned. And for those of you who've joined along the way, whatever year that you joined, or if you're a brand new listener, I'm really grateful that you continue to tune in. And my hope is that this continues to be a huge resource for all of you and for people who haven't yet found this podcast. Not like in the world of podcasting, for a podcast to last 8 years, let alone pushing 9 years, is a long time. Not a lot of podcasts last that long. It's not an easy thing to continue to do. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And a lot of people start out really wanting their podcast to last a long time, but for life happens or it becomes unsustainable or whatever. So it's not lost on me that this is a big accomplishment. And if I can say, I'm really proud that I've been able to continue and last this long, and that people are still interested in coming in and being on here to share their story, and that more and more experts are available because this field has grown and is growing because of a lot of work that organizations like PSI have done, and all of the advocacy work that's done. People aren't just experts anyways, aren't just focused on learning the fundamentals of perinatal mental health anymore. There are a lot of specialties within perinatal mental health, like postpartum psychosis, or specializing in neurodivergence in perinatal mental health, or looking specifically at birth trauma within perinatal mental health, perinatal loss. And there are really just so many ways that even people who have specific therapeutic modalities that they are trained in are coming to us to share how those therapeutic modalities can help people who are dealing with perinatal mental health conditions. So I've been able to see and really feel and hear in all of these episodes the growth of this field. in the depth of content that people are sharing, the depth of knowledge that experts have and people with lived experience have, we're well beyond just some burgeoning field. Perinatal mental health as a condition, of course, has been around for forever, but the words that we use now have evolved. The way we look at perinatal mental health has changed and evolved. Even with PSI being around for 35, 36, 37 plus years, I can't remember exactly right now. And that was at the beginning of perinatal mental health really being on the map. A lot of organizations being founded, a lot of experts starting to talk more about these conditions. From that point, certainly the field has grown a lot, but in the last almost 9 years I've been doing this podcast, I can really feel the growth. And since I've been specializing in perinatal and mental health for nearly 15 years, I've also been able to see the growth, my own depth of understanding, my own education from people who come on to share their stories, from my own clients, being able to see the intricacies of how perinatal mental health plays out in people's lives and how the knowledge and more research that's happened has been able to enhance the field and deepen the field and widen the field to really encapsulate more and more of people's actual lived experiences. As I mentioned before, when I started this podcast, I didn't know fully what I was doing. It was a learn on the job. I had taken a course on podcasting and how to start one and what equipment to purchase and how to do your sound and even how to do a little bit of editing. And for the first 13 episodes, I did the content editing myself. I had a friend of the family help me with some of the audio editing, but that became unsustainable. There's no way I could stay up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning trying to learn a new skill of editing. Found Team Podcast, who's been my editor since then, and I've been with them since. And that's been amazing. And along the way, about 4 years ago, I got an assistant, my assistant and team member, Sonia, who helps me so much. And without her, this just wouldn't be possible because she does so much to help me keep this going. Yeah, that's my team essentially, is my podcast editors who are also amazing kind of mentors and give guidance, and Sonia, who's been amazing, and me. That's the little team that keeps this going, but it definitely is the little engine that could. But yeah, those first months were difficult, exciting for sure, exciting and fun, and came with a lot of learning along the way. And it's nice to know now with my process and the support of my team members that we're just in a flow, and that makes it easier to continue this podcast, which I am doing. And thankfully, I had some heavy hitters as the first guest. Dr. Shoshana Bennett was my first guest. I had Dr. Wendy Davis, who's executive director of Postpartum Support International. I had Diana Lynn Barnes, who's one of the leading experts in perinatal psychosis. And these are people who are still deeply connected, deeply involved, and doing such important work in the field. So I'm very honored that they helped me to kick this off. And along the way, some of the things that I've seen is how much for the people who've shared their stories, how much it's helped support listeners. It's honestly also helped the people who've shared their stories. Sometimes the folks who've come on here to share their experience, it's the first time they've said anything publicly or shared parts of their journey that they had never shared before publicly. And it takes an awful lot of courage to be able to do that. Just from my own reflection on how hard it was for me to start to open up about it, I know personally what that felt like for me. And I just really, and for the people who have come on and shared their story, I get messages from listeners and from other people about how impactful that is, about how it helps break down the stigma for them, about how hearing other people's stories has encouraged them to get the help that they need, has helped them to be able to talk to their family members or their medical providers, how they've been able to connect with therapists or support groups or other types of support that have helped lift them out of their perinatal mental health condition and to be able to get back to their lives. What is super interesting about doing a podcast like this is I'm here. I'm in my house. I'm in my office. I'm talking to you out there, but I literally don't know where this lands when it goes out there. I see the numbers that come in. I see the thousands of downloads that come in per month. And so I know that it's getting out there. But what I really love is when I hear back from people who've listened to the episodes, been impacted, have taken the time to tell me how the podcast has supported them. And some of the ones that are just the most touching and amazing and unbelievable from just sitting here in this room by myself or talking to people on Zoom is that this podcast has saved people's lives. That's huge. I almost cussed. That is really a big deal. And because people have shared their story and experts have shared their wisdom, we collectively have been able to support people and save their life. That is huge. And it's almost too big to wrap my head and heart around, but it is true. And it's one of the most amazing parts of this podcasting journey for me is that it reaches people out there and helps them and supports them in ways that I will never know. And one of the other things that I don't know, like how it's all going to play out, is how each episode impacts people or how many people listen. Like how many people are going to listen to each episode or which episode's going to be the most listened to or the most downloaded. Like I will be sitting here thinking like after an interview, after nearly every single interview, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, everybody has to hear this. This is amazing. This is just like the story that this person has or the expertise that they're bringing. Everybody needs to hear this." And in my heart of hearts, I want this to go to every single person in the world who could possibly need this, to hear this story, to hear this knowledge, to get this education. So when I see the numbers come in, it's interesting to see how it plays out. So if you don't know much about podcasts, one of the things that's cool about this is that these episodes are evergreen, meaning from the moment I've released it into the world, people can listen to it. So you could right now go back and dig into the archives of 2016 and listen to everything from the beginning forward. They are there and available. And people do that. So episodes get cumulatively more and more downloads and more listens over time. It's not just like, hey, it goes out this week. People only listen for that week. You can go through and select, even type in your search bar of your podcast platform that you listen on and even type in your search bar of your podcast platform that you listen on a topic that you want to listen to. And if it's a word in the title or something that's tagged in the episode, that episode will come up and you can listen to it. If you typed in OC or psychosis or depression or intrusive thoughts or high sensitivity, those kinds of things, you can get really specific episodes or you can scroll through and listen to all of them. So initially, I had hosted this podcast on one platform and it was there for years. And then in 2022, towards the end of 22, I transitioned to a different platform, just like that's where the podcast lives. And then it goes out through an RSS feed to all the other podcast platforms. So that's where I can see the statistics on not who has listened, but where it's being listened to, how many downloads each episode has, and I can pick and choose some statistics if I want to be tracking things. So I've selected a couple of episodes. Since I only have data right now on the current podcast platform that I'm on, from 2022, episode 233. That was the first episode on this new platform. So I don't have full historical data on those numbers, plus the numbers that those episodes have accumulated since been on the new platform, if that makes sense. I'm just going to give you a rundown of the top 3 episodes over the last couple of years by year. So from the year 2022, the top 3 episodes are number 239, Pregnancy and Infant Loss with expert Dvora Entin. Second is episode 238, Pregnancy and Infant Loss, A Story of Loss, Healing, and Helping Others with guest Jennifer Burgard. And episode 241, From Pregnancy Anxiety to Making Impactful Change for New Parents with Anne Wanland. And as I'm naming these top 3 episodes, what I'm talking about are the number of downloads that I see on the back end. It's not including YouTube views, it's just audio listens. But if there are any of them that you haven't heard yet or you would like to hear, that's why I'm including the episode number so that you can refer back to it, scroll through Apple Podcasts or Spotify or even YouTube, wherever you listen, and find those numbers so you can listen to that episode as well. From 2023, the top episode was 256. Managing Overstimulation for Highly Sensitive Parents with Amy Lajeunesse. In second was episode 262, Impacts of High Functioning, Severe Postpartum Anxiety and Depression with Caitlin Shattuck. And in number 3, episode 250, Coping with Holiday Burnout. That was a session I did. So that was a solo episode with just me. And now going into 2024, of course, the top episode was number 336, In Conversation with Alanis Morissette and Postpartum Support International. And boy, oh boy, if you have not yet listened to that episode, go find it. Episode 333. And coming in second is episode 309, The Good Enough Mother with Dr. Sophie Brock. Also definitely a must listen. And I actually have a tie for third place. So I'm going to give you 2 episodes. Number 316, Overstimulation and Sensory Overload in Motherhood with Holly Peretz. And episode number 324, Postpartum Psychosis, A Couple's Experience with Dr. Rowena and Derek Winkler. Definitely go check those out. And again, as I said before, these episodes are constantly being listened to, so the numbers for all of them go up. That's just the beauty of having an evergreen podcast, that as long as I am doing this, or even if I'm not doing this, but the podcast lives somewhere, you can access these episodes at any time. Overall, over the last couple of years, the top 3 episodes overall are, again, episode 256, Managing Overstimulation for Highly Sensitive Parents with Amy Lajeunesse, episode 244, Postpartum Depression and Anxiety's Impact and Healing Journey with Rosalinda Hyder, and number 3, episode 239, Pregnancy and Infant Loss with expert Dvora Entin. So each and every one of those episodes and all of the last 400 episodes have meant a great deal to me. And being able to hear from some of you who've been able to send me some feedback about how they've touched you or helped you is really encouraging. I love hearing from people because hearing story and sharing story is such a powerful tool for healing. Just imagine you may have never met the person who's talking, but there might be something in their story that you resonate with that gives you some insight, that makes you think about your own journey in a different way, helps you reflect on maybe what you really want in life. I know for sure that for at least one person, this podcast has helped them to leave a toxic relationship. That isn't something I necessarily set out to do or would have thought could be an impact, but something for them helped them to move through that situation and find healing for themselves. That's right. That's just amazing. And it's also true that some of these stories are really hard to listen to. They're hard to hear. They are hard to resonate with. It is hard to remember your own pain when you listen to somebody else's pain. And I know that some people don't listen to stories or podcasts like this because they might be afraid or worried about how they're going to feel while listening to a story. And that's okay too. Everybody's on their own journey, has their own level of tolerance for emotional pain or whatever it feels like for you. And then again, some people who don't listen initially do come back and listen when they've had a little bit of healing for themselves, or they know they need and want to resonate with somebody else's story. It's almost sounds cliche at this point, but the idea that to know that you're not alone in your experience of what this feels like, even if you are literally feeling alone, like you don't have the support around you that you need, you don't have the people to talk to that you want to, or you don't yet, like you haven't yet gotten to therapy or to a support group. This idea that we're not alone means that not necessarily that those people are sitting right next to you and you're not alone. It means that you're not alone in this shared experience, that you're not the only person who has felt this, who has experienced this, who has lived through this, who's had that depth of pain and suffering. And there is such a large community of people who have been able to get the help and healing that they need so that they can move through and move on with their life. And part of the reason why this podcast and all of the resources in perinatal mental health are so important is because not everybody does. Not everybody is able to get the help that they need or the right help. And unfortunately, for some people, it does end in loss of life. And that is devastating. It's just devastating that there are mothers and people that we lose to these conditions, and that there's ongoing stigma, and that people have to be afraid that if they are honest about how they feel and seek the kind of support that they need, that somebody's going to misunderstand them or misinterpret what they're saying. And that keeps people silent and it keeps people suffering. And sometimes it results in loss of life. And if I'm going to be honest, it's still too high of a number. It's still too high of a number. So sharing stories is powerful because I'm sitting here, I don't know who's going to listen to this. You sharing it with the people you've shared it with, you don't know how it's going to impact them or who they will then share it with. And I think part of the reason why story is so powerful is, of course, all of the reasons that I've already listed, but passing down stories and talking about experiences has happened throughout time. This is not new. This is how culture is shaped. This is how information is passed down generation to generation. This storytelling was a primary form of communicating. It was a way to teach people about your experience or other people's experiences for them to learn from so that they don't have to suffer the same things or go through the same things. And honestly, that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going. For sure, there are times when I'm like, oh gosh, can I keep doing this? Do I have the energy and the motivation? And then I have an interview with somebody and I'm like, yep, I sure do. I'm going to keep doing this. That's true for everything that people do. You have moments where even if it's something you love, you might have a moment where you're like, oh, life pulls on you in many different ways. So anyways, that's just a part of my journey. And I'm sure for a lot of other people, there's too. But me hearing story is what keeps me going as well. Me getting notes from people, the emails, that's encouraging to me. It's helpful so that I know this is landing somewhere. It's having an impact somewhere. You've heard people say, well, if I could just help one person, I know this is helping more than one person. I'm so like beyond, I don't know if this is the right word, but grateful that I get to have this space and help people in this way. If you've ever heard any little part of my story, when I was young, very young, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 in those years, I'd always think to myself, and what a strange thought for a kid in a way, I would always think to myself, how can one person change the world? How can one person have an impact? And it always felt to me like it had to be some like huge, massive, grand gesture. I don't know. I'm trying to think of people to give examples for, but certainly people who've come before her, people like Gandhi or Thich Nhat Hanh or Mother Teresa, or the names of people who have made big change in the world. But what I've come to find through this process is that there are ripple effects. There's the butterfly effects of these things that we do in the world. It doesn't have to have those huge monumental impact type of things. So this for me is my way of having impact. My hope for certainly not changing the world. That's a big thought for a little kid to have. But that like deep desire as a highly sensitive person, highly sensitive kid when I was younger and still am, having that kind of impact is important to me. And it's one of the reasons why I continue to do this kid to have. But that like deep desire as a highly sensitive person, highly sensitive kid when I was younger and still am, having that kind of impact is important to me. And it's one of the reasons why I continue to do this. And my hope is that comes through. That comes through in the interviews, it comes through in my solo episodes or the behind the sessions episodes. Just love for people to know that they don't have to suffer, that they can find help and healing, that they can feel like themselves or a different version of themselves that's maybe even new and improved, or at least easier, have some ease in their life. And sharing these stories, and of course, being a therapist, being a psychologist, doing this work with people individually, that's my motivation. And my hope is that you all who are listening feel that through this easier, have some ease in their life. And sharing these stories, and of course, being a therapist, being a psychologist, doing this work with people individually, that's my motivation. And my hope is that you all who are listening feel that through this. And if you didn't before, I hope you do now. And I hope you to listen, continue to share, continue to lift other people and other people's voices that are important. And that's everybody. Everybody's voice is important. I want to restate that. I don't love that. My hope is that you keep listening, you keep sharing, and we collectively find our ways of healing, be supportive to each other, share resources like this or others. Doesn't have to be this, but something. We don't have to hide in shame. We don't have to pretend like we're okay when we're not. You don't have to pretend like somebody else is okay when you know that they're not. It just can take a small-ish gesture of sharing an episode, sharing a resource, sharing your experience if you can and are able to, even if it's just with one other person. It might not feel like a big deal. It might feel like a huge deal, depending on you and who you are, to share with somebody or to give a resource or to check in with someone. But it does help. It does make an impact. So I want to thank you all one more time for listening, for sharing this, for watching if you're with me on YouTube, sharing your story on this podcast with everyone who has shared, for all the experts who have come on to share their wisdom and information and knowledge and education. I'm honored that you all spend time with me, and then I get to spend some time with you. Once again, thank you so much for being here. Until next time.